So you're either looking for methods to improve your art faster, or you're having difficulties finding an art style. This video is perfect for you. In this video, I'm going to break down all the different methods I use to study for my favorite artists. I'm also going to explain how I implement a little bit of their style into my own projects as well. So if any of that interests you, be sure to stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll be 100% confident on what you need to do to study your favorite artists. Before I get into the studies, I do want to bring up a very important point, and that is a lot of people, when learning how to draw, think that they need to find a style from the get-go. But the reality of finding your art style is that it's built over a long period of time. It takes a lot of practice, skill, and drawing a lot of what you like. So that's what brings us here today, to where I could hopefully get you to study other artists that have already developed their style, and you could take a little bit from their ingredients and put it into your recipe, bake a cake out of it, and that will essentially be your own art style. But now that I got all that out of the way, let's finally get into how I study other artists. So the first thing that you want to do when going into a study is to make sure that you have a clear subject in mind that you want to study. This is important because it's not necessarily practical to sit down and say that you're going to study everything in a single art piece. There could be hundreds of concepts going on in a single art piece, and to say that you're just going to sit down and study every single one of them all in one go is just not mentally possible. So that is why it is crucial that you have a specific subject in mind when going into a study. I found that the best way to find subjects for study is to basically just create a very broad list of all the things that you want to improve upon in your own art. So for example, I created a list of all the things that I'd want to improve in my art, and some of the things are anatomy, shading, color, line art, fabric, perspective, and composition. So just a very simple, basic, broad list of the things that I would want to improve in my art style. After we've made the list of the basic subjects, we want to choose one subject from the list and break it down into even smaller subjects. So for example, I'll choose one of my favorite subjects, which is anatomy, and I'll break it down into smaller subcategories. I could break it down into the head, torso, arms, and legs. And as you can see, we've taken a very broad subject like anatomy and broke it down into even smaller subcategories. So we broke down a very broad subject into smaller subcategories, but we're not done yet. We're going to break down those subcategories into even smaller subjects. So remember what I said, it is very important to have a clear, focused goal when going into a study, because you're more likely to get something out of it when you're clear and focused and you don't have all these different distractions in your way. That is why we're going to break down these subcategories into even smaller subjects. So after breaking anatomy down, I was left with 4 different subjects, which were head, torso, arms, and legs. And let's say if I wanted to sit down and study the torso, I could break down the torso into even smaller sections, such as the neck, shoulders, chest, and abs. We went from telling ourselves that we wanted to study something broad like anatomy to something a lot more clear and concise, like we wanted to study the torso with a focus on the abs. Now that you broke down the subjects to be a lot more digestible, now it's time to get a list of the artists that you want to study. So I put together a list of all the artists that I'm thinking about studying from, and on the right I have the topic that I want to study, which yet again it is anatomy from the region of the torso with a focus on the abs. So now that you have this frame of reference, it is a lot easier to choose what artists that you want to study from to improve your style. And all the artists that I have on my list would be pretty good to study from, but at the moment I've been pretty obsessed with the Chainsaw Man manga, which has an amazing art style. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. And Fujimoto is the author behind it, so I'm betting to do another study on Fujimoto's work. Now that we selected our artist, it's time to get a piece of artwork that corresponds with our subject. And a good place that I usually have success with is Pinterest, and I typed in Chainsaw Man because that is Fujimoto's work. And I'm just going to scroll until I find something that corresponds with torso. And yeah, pretty quickly I found something that corresponds with torso. So I'm going to use this as a reference for my study. So now that we have our reference photo lined up for us and our main focus, it is now time to jump in and study this photo. So when you're studying your drawing, you don't want to just draw it and call it a day. You actually want to study it and take notes on the very specific details that you find in your drawing. So one of the first things that I like to take note of is the basic construction of whatever the study is. And as you see here, I just drew a basic pencil sketch, and on the right I mapped out the construction. Now you don't really have to go and do this whole construction thing. I only did this as an example, but it just kind of shows me that his anatomy is pretty basic. It isn't too anything super exaggerated, and it's pretty something that you'd find pretty standard when it comes to anatomy. Now when learning how to draw, the tools that you use don't really matter so much, but if you're doing a deep dive on someone's style, it can help a lot to figure out what types of tools they use. So with that being said, it does help to do a little bit of the extra research and find out what kind of tools the artist uses, because you might be able to incorporate those tools into your own work and get that desired look that you're going for within your studies. So another example of things that you should be looking at when studying another artist are things like the lines they use or the different types of details that they use. So as you can see here, there is this line that connects the rib cage to the pelvis right here, and I just try to draw it as identical as possible with like the line thickness and the width and the line thickness, try to make it as similar as possible. And then I also want to take note of a very small detail, and that is that this line right here overlaps this line and it cuts into the shape. So this little overlap that happens right here doesn't just happen here, it also happens across more parts of the photo. So if I look here, it happens with the pec, it also happens with the abs going down into the pelvis, and these small details add up. And some of the things that I take note is that it adds a lot more depth. So I would go over to the side and I would say overlap adds more depth. And that's just one of the things that I've taken note of when studying this piece. So as you can see, I went back to my sketch and I took note of all the different overlaps and where I found them and how they added depth. And doing this and spending like maybe 5 to 10 minutes just trying to map all these out really solidifies this information in your brain, so you could go to a new drawing later into your own original work and use this type of information. Another cool aspect of his art that I want to take note of is his usage of these broken lines. And as you can see, they're kind of all over the place, but I've usually found them at the end of like solid lines or mainly for the abs, which is our main focus. And the reason why I think he uses them is because it makes the line art look a lot more organic instead of being robotic. Like as you can see here, he'll have like a solid line and then it kind of tapers off into this fade, which makes it almost look like the pec is receding back into the skin. And a lot of like the ab work right here too, there is some solid lines, but a lot of it is done with this dashed kind of faded lines. So this makes it look a lot more organic and kind of like it's under the skin instead of just like this robotic chiseled abs. So I'll go over to the side here and I'll say broken lines make the work look more organic. And there you go. Now I'll just go and replicate whatever he did in this artwork onto my pencil sketch and really solidify what I took note of. So here you can see I just mapped out where he put all the broken lines, and I'm going to take note of them here. I noted that he used them a lot for the abs and at the end of a lot of the solid lines to show that they're kind of fading off under the skin. Another thing that I noticed about this panel is that when it comes to his anatomy or skin, I don't really see much shading going on, so there's nothing like screen tones or hashing. And I find this very important because when I was doing comics, I would overuse screen tones quite a bit. So seeing a professional not even use screen tones on the skin is very important to me. So I'm also taking note of that. No screen tones. So those are just some of the things that I would take note of when doing a study. When it comes to your study, your notes may look 100% different than mine depending on the artist that you do. I just wanted to show you the detailed approach you should have when going into a study. You shouldn't just draw the photo one for one and call it a day. You should actually look at it under a microscope and see all the little details that make this drawing what it is. I also wanted to mention that you shouldn't stick with just one photo, but study a multitude of photos from this artist so you could recognize patterns within their art and really start to solidify the different style that's going on so you can incorporate it into your own art. So now that you've done a study on your favorite artist, now comes time for the most important part, and that is actually applying it practically. So you already know your subject. Mine was the torso with a greater focus on the abs, and you're going to take that subject and go online and find a completely different reference photo unrelated to the artist that you're studying and just find something that aligns with that subject. So the next thing that you're going to do is use all the different aspects that you learned in that study to do a drawing of a completely separate reference. So after a couple minutes I came up with a basic pencil sketch, and now I'm ready to apply the things that I've learned to this reference. So now I'm just going to apply the things that I've learned in the study onto my reference, and one of the first things that I took note of was the overlap. So now I'm just going to remember to add overlaps to the work. And the other thing that I took note of in the study was the usage of broken lines after some solid lines, or to indicate the organic shapes of the abs. So I'm going to go add some of those. I'm also taking note of where the artist used it as well and trying to apply it to my reference. So as you can see, I applied what I did on the study to what I did on the reference, and I'm pretty satisfied with the results. So just like the studies, when it comes to applying it practically, you want to make sure that you don't stop at just one. You want to make sure that you do multiple so you can solidify the different styles that you practiced. An important thing to remember is that there's hundreds of different things that you could study. For example, you could study backgrounds and shading, or you could study stuff like hands or clothing through different artists. Also different types of line work. I also have some screen tone practice of how to use different screen tones, how these artists kind of use shading and different types of clothing folds, and even things like different creatures or animals. So it's really good to not just copy these things one for one. It's good to take notes and really absorb the art styles of different artists, and so you could put it into your own work and come up with your original stuff that takes inspiration from multiple different artists. So there you guys have it. That is just one way to study your favorite artists. And remember that coming up with an art style does not come first in drawing. It takes a lot of skill, practice, and time in order to build one, so do not bang yourself over the head if you cannot find one yet. That's why we do studies like this, so we could eventually build up our styles. So with all that being said, if you guys enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a like. And if you guys have any methods on how you study different artists, please leave it in the comments below. I'll be really interested to hear about it. So yeah, that's it. I'm done. And guys, please keep practicing. I'm out. Bye.